Good afternoon and welcome. This webinar is a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, CFBNP, and Veterans Health Administration Homeless Program Office. My name is Trulesta Pauling. I am the Outreach Specialist in CFBNP. I will be your moderator this afternoon. Everyone's phone has been muted. If you have a question during the presentation today, please type it in the Q&A box on the screen. I will read the questions at the end of the presentation, and the presenter will provide a response. The presentation will be made available to everyone that registered and attend the webinar today. This is a live recording. I would like to thank Mr. Shawn for this collaboration. We are grateful for your time today. But before we get started, I would like to introduce Reverend Conrad Washington, Director of the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, for welcoming remarks. Reverend Washington serves as the Director and is retired from the United States Marine Corps with 20 years of active duty service with a combat tour in 2004 in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom II. Reverend Washington is an ordained non-denominational minister in the Christian faith and actively serving. He received his master's degree of divinity in pastoral studies from Moody Theological Seminary, master's of arts in business management from the University of Redlands, and a bachelor of science degree in education from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Reverend Washington.
And thank you, True. I appreciate it. And thank all of you for joining us today. This is our second webinar of 2025, and I'm excited for a number of reasons. First, I'm excited because we have Shawn, a colleague in the VA who's very good at what he does. So Shawn, from me to you and from my team, we appreciate you, brother. We thank you for being here today. But I'm also excited about the fact that we're entering into 2025, and I wanted to share very briefly, because I know this is a very interesting topic. One of the priorities, homelessness for veterans, and we're likely going to have a lot of questions. But I want to share with you that this office, the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, is reestablished each administration in the White House through an executive order. So as you know, we're under a new administration beginning next week. And so we're going to believe and have faith that we're going to continue to operate within the Department of Veteran Affairs and bring resources and information to veterans and their families and caregivers. So touch and agree with us in faith that we're going to still stick around and do what we do. I also wanted to share with you that imagine what it's like having an organization that is the second largest federal agency. Also, imagine what it's like within that organization having over 400,000 employees across the world, all with one common goal: to support and share information and resources to our veterans, their families, and beneficiaries. That's what the VA is all about. We have three administrations: National Cemetery Administration, Veterans Health Administration, and Veterans Benefit Administration. Within each of those administrations are resources that are available to you. This office, we try to pull from each one of those administrations to share with you information and resources. So I just want you to know that we're excited about 2025. We're excited about staying around under this new administration and still providing quality information and resources that are helpful to you and sometimes can be life-changing and generational. So thank you for joining us, and we continue to hope you would be with us as well. Be blessed.
Thank you, Reverend Washington. At this time, I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Mr. Shawn. Please read a summary of his bio on the screen. Mr. Liu is the Director of Communications for the VHA Homeless Programs Office. He is responsible for developing strategic communications that enhance efforts to prevent and end homelessness among veterans and their families. His office hosts a monthly podcast called End Veteran Homelessness. That it offers a look into VA's nationwide efforts to help veterans experiencing and at risk of homelessness. Mr. Liu also supports the development and implementation of national policies plans, guidelines, and technical assistance for a variety of VA homeless programs and initiatives. This past year marks Shawn's 16th year working with VA. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology degree from Florida International University and a Master's of Social Work degree from Florida State University. He is a licensed clinical social worker with the state of Florida. At this time, I give you the floor, Mr. Shawn Liu.
Great. Thanks so much, Ms. Pauling. And thank you so much, Mr. Conrad, Reverend Conrad, for that wonderful welcome. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with you today to talk about a subject that I am really passionate about, veteran homelessness, and the work that we are doing at VA all across the country to reduce and ultimately end veteran homelessness. I'm going to quickly say hi on camera, and then I'm going to shut off my camera to save the bandwidth. I've got a lot of really helpful information for you today to give you a briefing on our progress towards ending veteran homelessness. We're going to touch on a lot of different topics, including the programs and services that VA and our community partners have to support veterans as they experience homelessness and move from homelessness to permanent, stable housing. With that in mind, here is our roadmap for today. I'm going to start off with some introductory concepts, just give you some definitions about what it means for a veteran to be homeless, what that looks like, especially because it has implications for program eligibility. Then we're going to shift gears and talk about the progress, the work that has been done to reduce and ultimately end veteran homelessness. You saw some information already from the Bluff video that kicked off our presentation for today. We do have some more breaking news, some more recent updates that I'm really, really excited to share with you. Then we're going to shift gears again, just provide a little bit of a summary of some of our recent homelessness goals that we believe were critical drivers in what some of the more recent positive changes and updates are for the state of veteran homelessness in America. We'll shift gears again to talk about the actual programs and services that VA and our partners have that supports homeless veterans. And then before we wrap up for Q&A, we're going to talk about ways in which you can join us in this mission, whether it's being as a volunteer, doing donations, or otherwise supporting your community by letting the veterans who are in your life know about the programs and services that we have. And then, of course, we'll leave some time at the end for your questions. To get us going, I'm going to start with some introductory concepts. This is going to be a little bit dry, but I think it's important to start by defining what we mean when we say homeless in the context of veteran homelessness, because again, this has very important implications for program eligibility. The actual definition of homelessness comes from statute. The language you see here on the screen actually comes from the Homeless Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing, or HARTH Act, of 2009. This actually codified the federal definition of homelessness for federal assistance. And the HARTH Act outlined 4 categories that if you or a veteran that you know fell into one of these categories, you would be considered homeless for the purposes of program eligibility. Category 1 is something that you probably know intuitively because you probably see Category 1 out in your streets all throughout the country. Where people lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And this category usually takes 2 forms. The first form is emergency shelter, so oftentimes buildings where we house temporarily people experiencing homelessness. This also includes transitional housing, safe havens. I want to acknowledge that during the COVID-19 pandemic, we made amazing uses of hotels and motels to provide emergency shelter. So that's a first part of Category 1 is these emergency settings, these sheltered settings. But then there are unsheltered settings or places not meant for human habitation. Now think, when we say unsheltered, think literally on the streets, literally in the woods, in encampments, under bridges. Just as an aside, unsheltered homelessness is one of the most dangerous experiences a person can face. It impacts their whole health, mind, body, and soul. So at VA, unsheltered homelessness is a major priority. And I would argue in your communities all across America, unsheltered homelessness is a major priority too, because it's one of the most visible indicators of homelessness in your communities. People living out on the streets, under bridges, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a major priority for all of us in America. Category 2 is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure category. It basically focuses on those who are at imminent risk of homelessness, that they would essentially become Category 1, likely within 14 days, oftentimes evidenced by an eviction notice and an investigation and showing that there's no other subsequent support systems that that veteran or that household can participate in. If they are going to be meeting that category 1 within 14 days, they would be considered at risk of homelessness and thus eligible for programs and services from VA. Categories 3 and 4 get a little bit broader, and they focus a lot on some unique circumstances. Category 3 is specifically for families with minor children or youth under the age of 25 or unaccompanied youth under the age of 25. In most instances in our world here at VA, Category 3 is most often seen with women veterans who are more likely to have minor children as part of their household. And this is anybody who actually is considered homeless under different federal statutes, such as the Runaway Homeless Youth Act or other statutes that govern the U.S. Department of Education. And oftentimes what this is talking about is a period of instability, a pattern of instability of 2 or more moves in the last 60 days, where a household with kids may be doubled up and couch surfing and going from family to friend to auntie to uncle and so on and so on and so on. That pattern of constant movings, at least 2 or more in the most recent 60 days, is unbelievably disruptive to the development of youth and minor children. And so if there's a family in this circumstance where they are ping-ponging from place to place to place, they're considered Category 3 for the purposes of program eligibility. The last category, Category 4, is also important for women veterans, and it's those who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, who have no other residence. Often folks who are fleeing domestic violence, either if they can't get into a shelter and they don't want to be unsheltered, they also often experience their homelessness as being couch surfing or doubled up. And what you probably noticed from the other 2 categories, Category 1 and Category 2, couch surfing doesn't really fall under there, but it does here in Category 4 because fleeing domestic violence or other life-threatening circumstances is very, very critical. Now, when I say other life-threatening circumstances, I'm largely talking about natural disasters. Right now in Los Angeles, we have raging wildfires. Just a few months ago, we had a couple very, very severe hurricanes that tore through the southeast of the United States. So for those folks fleeing those life-threatening circumstances, along with folks fleeing domestic violence, they would be considered Category 4 homeless. I know I've just spent a little bit of time reading off statute to you, but again, this has very important implications for program eligibility. So as potential advocates for future veterans you may actually encounter in your life who are homeless, knowing these categories is going to be important to motivating them to reach out to VA for help. So you're probably wondering, Shawn, that's all well and good, but why exactly do veterans become homeless? Is it the drugs? When I was watching the TV, I thought it was the drugs. Maybe it's the mental illness? Shawn, what is the deal? And that's a really great question. When we think about risk factors for why veterans become homeless, we like to think of them in 2 different buckets or categories. Individual risk factors, which determine why one veteran may be at greater risk than a different veteran, and then system level factors, which is why veterans in maybe this community over here may be at greater risk than veterans in that community over there. When we look at the individual risk factors first, these are things that you probably can intuit, and you probably heard a lot of news stories or maybe read a lot of articles on the internet about. Yes, the mental illness, especially for veterans who have combat exposure, combat-related PTSD is a risk factor. Yes, substance use disorders, but also things such as lack of stable income or employment, history of incarceration. Just as an aside, history of incarceration is one of the strongest predictors of future homelessness for men. So that we want to kind of put a pin in that for a little bit. And then there are certain things that happen way outside of military service, such as lack of social support in their current community, and things that even happened way before military service, such as adverse childhood events. So these are individual level risk factors, why one specific veteran may be at greater risk than a different veteran. But that's only half of the story. The other half are these system level risk factors. They have to do with the neighborhood, the environment, the community that the veterans live in. And although they may not be intuitive, once I start saying them out loud, you'll probably be like, oh yeah, Shawn, that makes a lot of sense actually. Things such as lack of affordable housing. So regardless of how much money a veteran has coming in each month, are there places that they can rent or own that are affordable based on their income? Lack of economic opportunity. So whether or not a veteran has marketable job skills, are there good, decent living wage jobs in their community that they can sustain themselves with? and then other factors such as high crime neighbors and cultural factors. So what I hope you take away from it here is that it's not just the drugs. It's not just the alcohol. It's this mix, this confluence, this interplay between individual factors and system level factors. At VA, our job is very simple. We want to reduce through our programs and services the negative impact of all of these different individual and system level factors while boosting what we call protective factors, such as feelings of connectedness to their community, a sense of spirituality, having a good, decent job, having strong relationships. We want to boost all of those while minimizing the negative impact of these risk factors through our programs and services. Next up, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about the work to end veteran homelessness and the progress that we're doing. You all are taxpayers here, and so to be very crass in a way, your taxpayer dollars are what pay for all of the different programs and services that go towards reducing and ultimately ending veteran homelessness. So we want to make sure that you feel and you get those progress updates on how we're doing to make sure then to reassure you that there's a good return on the investment that your taxpayer dollars are going towards. What we're looking at here, this chart, it comes from something called the point in time count. It is administered by our partners at the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development and is administered locally by organizations called Continuum of Care Parties in your communities. There's about 400 COCs or Continuum of Cares nationwide. And every year in January, they go out into the world and count and estimate the number of people experiencing homelessness in America, including veterans. So what we're looking at here is the annual number of veterans as counted and revealed in the point in time count each year going back to 2010. And what you can see here is that veteran homelessness is actually at an all-time low. We've seen a 55% reduction in veteran homelessness since 2010. It's at an all-time low in 2024. This was January of 2024 of 32,882 veterans. This is in many ways, as I mentioned, the more recent update from what was shared during the Bluff video at the start of this webinar. In a couple other slides, I'm going to unpack this a little bit as well. I'm kind of in a little bit of a data-heavy oasis right now with you, but I'm going to try to make it valuable and relevant. So again, all-time low, 55.6% reduction since 2010. If you remember earlier that category 1 homelessness, where I said it kind of breaks out into sheltered homelessness and unsheltered homelessness, that breakout is represented here on this slide. It's a little bit busy, so I'm going to unpack what's going on. The bright red line at the top is overall homelessness, the combined count of sheltered and unsheltered veterans. Excuse me. The dark red line in the middle is sheltered veterans. And the dark blue line at the bottom is unsheltered veterans. So what you can see here is that the dark red line plus the dark blue line equals the bright red line. Forgive me for anybody who's colorblind. Unsheltered homelessness among veterans has decreased by 56.2%, and unsheltered homelessness has decreased not by as much, 54.8%. A couple other things. In the Bluff video, you heard from the presenter that there was an uptick in veteran homelessness. And you can kind of see it here from 2022 to 2023. There was an uptick. Not only that, one of the things that you will also see is that the reduction isn't really even throughout. We actually had a steep decline from 2010 to 2016, and then a shallowing out in the years that follow. We've been working really hard to get back on track to get major reductions in veteran homelessness. And later on in my presentation, I'm going to talk about some of the investments that we've been doing to improve the way our systems work to generate better outcomes and to get back to where we're seeing pretty steep declines in veteran homelessness. We're really, really excited about the progress so far. One of the things that's really relevant and important in my line of work is a fancy word called disaggregating your data. And that's a big jargony term. And what it basically means is that if you're looking at data on a population, on a community, that community is made up of different subpopulations or different other folks. So for example, different genders, different races, different geographies, et cetera, et cetera. And when we're in the job here of making sure that every veteran has a safe and stable place to call home, what we want to do is we want to disaggregate our data. We want to break out that data by different subpopulations to make sure that the work that we're doing is as effective for all of the different subpopulations. Because if it's not, if our programs and services aren't as effective for some populations, I want to know. My job isn't just to offer services and be done with it. My job is to end veteran homelessness. So I want to know and be part of the solution. To that end, what we've done here is we've actually taken that PIT count data and disaggregated it by gender and showing you women veterans. Women veterans, this is something that's really important because, as you've probably heard, women veterans are one of the fastest growing subpopulations of veterans in America. So they deserve extra focus to make sure that we're achieving the same housing outcomes for them as we are for all veterans. A couple of things on this slide. We're still looking at overall homelessness, sheltered homelessness, and unsheltered homelessness. There's a little bit of a typo here. The blue line is actually unsheltered homelessness. The blue line is unsheltered homelessness. So purple is sheltered. Purple is overall. Hot pink is sheltered. Kind of like light blue is unsheltered. And what you could see here is we going back for 2024. You're probably wondering, Shawn, why are we only going back to 2024 when you just showed me 2010? That's a good reason. We actually only started looking at gender data in the PIT count going back to 2024. So that's all we have to compare. And what we can see here is that veteran homelessness among women has decreased by 28.4%. Most, if not all of that reduction has been in sheltered homelessness. And by and large, with a little bit of like a couple outliers, unsheltered homelessness among women has been largely flat, has largely been stagnant. And that's kind of an issue because, again, if you remember earlier, I mentioned unsheltered homelessness is one of the most dangerous experiences a person can face. And so this unsheltered homelessness with women is something that's a major thing that we're looking at. Now, you're probably wondering, Shawn, this is not a fair apples to apples comparison. Just a while ago, just literally a slide before, you were showing us 2010. Now you're only showing us 2014. What's the deal? And I hear you. I respect that. So in this next slide, what we've done is we've actually taken the PIT count and we've compacted it to 2014 to 2024. So we have an apples to apples comparison. We've taken the bright red line of overall veterans. This includes veterans of all genders. And then the purple line of just women veterans. And what you can see here is that if we go back just to 2014, 10 years ago, there was a 33.8% decrease in homelessness among all veterans, but only a 28.4% decrease in women veterans. And if you also look, the spike with women veterans is a little bit more pronounced as well. So this is something that we're going to be looking at as well. Our goal is to make sure that every veteran, all veterans, every single veteran has a safe and stable place to call home. So we're going to be looking at very closely at not only women veterans, but all subpopulations to make sure that they are realizing the housing outcomes we want for all. Now, recently, you may have seen in the news, especially over the last couple weeks, because when this information dropped, it hit kind of a firestorm. Our partners at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development on December 27th, 2024, they published the full results of the full point-in-time count, including information not just about veterans, but overall homelessness in America. And very tragically, that report revealed that overall homelessness in America was at an all-time historical high, with nearly 800,000 veterans counted, 800,000 people counted in the point-in-time count. If we compare that to 2010, overall homelessness in America has actually increased by 21%. Since 2010, whereas veteran homelessness has actually decreased by 55.6% since that same time period. The contrast is really stark, and it is really tragic on what's going on right now, where we have overall homelessness in America at an all-time record high, while at the same time, we have veteran homelessness at an all-time record low. We're going to talk a little bit in a second about what's going on with veterans. Spoilers, it's about the resources and the coordinated efforts from VA and our partners. But this really, really stark contrast of what's going on right now, and just kind of showing the magnitude and the power of not only VA, but our community partners working together to make sure that every veteran has a safe and stable place to call home. One more chart, and then we're going to move on, just to kind of highlight what's going on in the context of all of the different work what we've actually taken here is added on a new chart. We're looking at the average rents for 1-bedroom units, fair market rent based off of HUD. This is going back to 2010, the average rents all across the country. And there's a couple of things going on here. We've superimposed that with the reduction in veteran homelessness. And one of the things I want to let you know is that we have scaled this so that the magnitude changes from year over year are fair, that a 10% increase on one domain, on one line, represents the same size as the other. So these are fair comparisons for anybody who's like familiar with charts. And what you could see here is that rents have been largely flat from 2010 to 2016, 2015 maybe, when we saw the greatest decreases, the most rapid decreases in veteran homelessness. And then that progress started to slow down around 2015 and 2016 when rents started to increase. And then when you get to 2022 to 2023, you see rents skyrocket about $90 on average to coincide with the uptick that we saw in the point in time count. And then with rents leveling off from 2023 to 2024, we actually see veteran homelessness declining again. This kind of goes back to those system level risk factors as well, especially housing affordability. Yes, mental health is a risk factor. Yes, drugs is a risk factor, but we really, really have to take a very closer look at housing affordability. And what we're going to talk about a little bit later is just how VA's homeless programs and services help with housing affordability. All right, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to touch on this concept of ending veteran homelessness. I actually say this so much, as Ms. Pauling mentioned in my introduction, I have a whole podcast on ending veteran homelessness. So it's probably helpful to define what I mean when I say ending veteran homelessness, because that's my job. That's what I'm working towards. And what we're not saying when we say ending veteran homelessness is that no veteran will experience a housing crisis again. A veteran's going to lose their job. A veteran's going to fall behind on their rent. They're going to fall behind on their mortgage. The bank might want to foreclose on them. They're going to experience financial crises. Those things happen. But the thing that we're working towards is that no one experiences the tragedy and dignity of homelessness, and that every veteran has a safe, stable, accessible, and affordable home. One of the things that's really important to note is that if we had a magic wand, waved the magic wand, and housed every veteran who is homeless right now today, frustratingly, somebody else tomorrow would experience a housing crisis and may fall into homelessness. And so what we're doing here is we're making sure that all of our programs and services work in concert with each other so that if that veteran experiences that housing crisis and starts to, tip over into homelessness, that we can catch them, we can wrap our arms around them, get them financially stable, get them housing stable, and then wrap them around with all of the other treatment, case management, and other supportive services to stay housed. Another thing that I want to mention, because especially if there are any like nonprofit providers on the call, I remember when I was a young social worker just getting into homelessness, a lot of the nonprofits, their mantra was, we're working ourselves out of a job. And while that was a fun sentiment, it was obviously not true. In a moment, I'm going to talk about the communities that have actually achieved an effective end to veteran homelessness. And what we know from all of them, literally all of them, that achieving that milestone of ending veteran homelessness was just the beginning. That sustaining that progress was just as hard, if not harder. So we will all still be in work because more veterans, just as time goes on, will still experience housing crises. Our programs and services may look differently, but there'll still be a need to help veterans stabilize and get stable again. I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time on this slide, but the way in which we operationalize an end to veteran homelessness is through something called the criteria and benchmarks. These are different qualitative and qualitative factors that when communities meet them, they achieve an effective end to veteran homelessness because their system works so amazing to support homeless veterans. Just from a high level, some of the different components, communities that have achieved an effective end to veteran homelessness literally know everybody who's homeless in their community by name. They can get them shelter if they want it. They are able to quickly move veterans to permanent housing and prove all of this through data, and have the resources to help veterans in the future. I also want to let you know that this is not pie in the sky stuff. 85 communities, including 3 whole states, Delaware, Connecticut, and Virginia, have achieved an effective end to veteran homelessness. Not only that, communities are achieving effective ends to veteran homelessness to this day. The most recent ones, 2 of them, actually happened in 2024 with Dallas, Texas, and Hennepin County, Minnesota, just recently. So this is actually work that is still happening and communities are still achieving to this day. Shifting gears again, I want to talk a little bit about the improvements that we've been making to achieve these outcomes that veteran homelessness has reached an all-time low. And these are our annual homelessness goals. So a little bit of background. You remember a couple slides ago, I mentioned that the decline in veteran homelessness wasn't even over the last 14 years. There was actually a lot of plummet in the first 6 years, and then progress has slowed down. When Secretary McDonough took over VA, he looked at that and he found it alarming, that slowdown. It was so alarming, we actually gave it a name. We called it the stall. We said progress towards veteran homelessness had stalled. So, to revitalize our efforts in 2022, and then again in 2023, Secretary McDonough challenged us. He says, you guys got to get into shape. And to do so, I'm going to challenge you to house at least 38,000 homeless veterans each year, back to back, and move them from homelessness to permanent housing. Just as an aside, permanent housing, that's our jargon. It means places that veterans would rent or own, oftentimes with subsidies that make the rental affordable for them. It's not their forever home. Veterans oftentimes move from one apartment to another, but it's in contrast to temporary housing that usually has time limits. We in the homeless programs and our partners, we said bet. And in 2022, we not only met that goal, we achieved it by housing 40,401 veterans. And again, in 2023, we strove to meet that and achieve it even more. Within 2023, we housed 46,552 veterans. This is the update for fiscal year 2024. For 2024, we set 3 goals for ourselves, acknowledging that we needed to aim higher. We actually increased our floor of the minimum number of veterans that we wanted to house to 41,000. By the end of the calendar year, at the end of the fiscal year, we actually housed nearly 48,000 homeless veterans. When you look back from fiscal year 2022, fiscal year 2023, and then fiscal year 2024, VA and our partners, we actually ended up housing 134,000 homeless veterans, right? Which was amazing, and a down payment on the work that we're going to continue to do to reduce the number of veterans experiencing homelessness. We also had a couple other goals. This prevention of returns to homelessness. Just as an aside, one thing that's really frustrating that you probably are familiar with substance recovery, if you've ever heard the concept that relapse is a part of addiction or relapse is a part of recovery, very frustratingly, relapse is also a part of homelessness. That there are oftentimes, not common, but it does happen, where a veteran, a person will move from homelessness to permanent housing, but circumstances will happen and they'll fall back into homelessness again. That's a really, really frustrating circumstance for everybody, including the veteran who thought their homelessness was ended. So we actually set a goal to make sure that of the veterans that we housed, at least 95% would stay housed at the end of the year. At the end of the fiscal year, actually 96% of the veterans who we housed stayed in housing, only 4% returned to homelessness. And of those, at least 90% of those veterans were on a path back to permanent housing. They were back in our system of care, which is really, really important. Lastly, to close the loop on the dangerousness of being unsheltered, we also set a goal to engage with 40,000 unsheltered veterans. When I say engagement, I mean just like talking with them, assessing them, and getting them into our system of care. The hope being that once they were engaged and working with us, we would get them on that path to permanent housing. By the end of the fiscal year, we actually exceeded that one as well by engaging with 42,064 veterans. These goals are important because in the face of rising rent costs, in the face of marginal increases in resources, the main things that we can do that is in our control at VA to continue to reduce the number of veterans experiencing homelessness is systems improvement, making sure that our programs and services are more efficient and more effective. And I would argue that these goals over the last several years were a direct contributor in what we see now with veteran homelessness being at an all-time low. And what I hope, because we're just about ready to do the 2025 point in time count in about a week or so, what I hope will be continued reductions in veteran homelessness. Simply put, by housing more veterans, by keeping veterans in their home and engaging with more unsheltered veterans to get them in our system of care and on that path, I think we're on a really, really good track to continue to reduce veteran homelessness. You're probably wondering, okay, Shawn, all of that was great, but how do you actually do this? What are the programs and services that you have at your disposal? Also a really great question. I'm not going to spend a whole lot because we actually have a lot of programs and services, but I'm going to give you the high levels just so that you know what folks can expect as they get connected to us at VA. Now, what I've done here is I've created this little timeline, this little process flow, and it really touches the different experiences that veterans will have going from housing instability and housing crisis to homelessness back into permanent housing. First and foremost, we have prevention services that keep veterans in their own homes right now, prevents all of this from happening. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. For those veterans who do become homeless, we have outreach services that serve as the front door to not only VA's homeless programs, but everything VA, the benefits administration, the health administration, even other mainstream benefits like Medicaid, Medicare, and food stamps. Just as an aside, if you remember from way early in this presentation, I mentioned that history of incarceration was a strong predictor, one of the strongest predictors actually for men and their future homelessness. Because of that, we actually have outreach that goes into jails and prisons to support veterans as they are released from those settings so that they can get connected to VA. Oftentimes when we're working on veterans on their path to permanent housing, they need a place to go, right? So we provide temporary housing in the form of emergency shelter and transitional housing programs. These are our residential services that give them good, warm, safe places to stay right now. And again, so that they're on that path to permanent housing with our permanent housing services that provides rental subsidies, short or long-term subsidies that will make rent affordable for them so that the veteran only has to pay a percentage of their income almost regardless of whatever the rent is. It's usually based off of fair market rent and comparable costs. So it's not like luxury homes, but it does scale the veterans' rental costs based off of what their income is. And then, of course, with our permanent housing services, we also have varying degrees of case management, treatment, therapy, primary care, and all other healthcare services. So when veterans get housed, they stay housed. This is what I call the alphabet soup slide. It is all of our programs and services crosswalked to the chart that I just mentioned. I believe you're going to get a copy of these slides later. All of these are hyperlinks, but you can also take a screenshot and Google them if you want. These are all websites if you want to learn more. What I didn't mention on the previous slide were a couple other specialty services. We have our homeless veteran community employment services that help veterans get those good, decent paying jobs. We have homeless patient aligned care teams that are basically primary care doctors that have their clinics set up to address the unique barriers that street homeless veterans face. And then lastly, we have a new program, our Legal Services for Veterans, which helps reduce the legal barriers to getting housing. These are all of our different programs and services. Again, like when you get the slides, you can click on the links, but also you can Google them and we'll come right to our pages. I know we've got some questions in the chat and I want to get to them. So before we get to the Q&A, I just want to talk a little bit about how you can help and ways in which you can stay connected and engaged if you've been interested in what we've been talking about today. First and foremost, if you encounter a veteran out in your community, be patient with them. They may not have had their basic needs met. To be very honest, I need to eat pretty regularly. If I skip a meal, I skip lunch, I get super hangry and become the biggest man baby, right? Turn that up to 1,000 and you might get close to the experience of what it means to be unsheltered, street homeless. A lot of veterans who we work with who are unsheltered probably didn't sleep well last night. They're probably dehydrated as all get out. If you're in Los Angeles or Southern California, you may have just got a lot of smoke exposure for all of the fires and been displaced. If you're in an area that has just been wrecked and ravaged by a lot of the polar vortexes that have been going on, you may be freezing. You probably didn't eat yet. You definitely haven't had a shower in a while. Because of all of those things, experiencing homelessness can be very, very challenging. So make sure you're just patient with them. Kind of put yourself in their shoes and what they may have been experiencing just that night alone, much less however long they've been homeless. If you're going to help them get connected to us, which we encourage you to do so, try to remember that they may not have a reliable means of communication like a cell phone or a physical address. So we may want to do some problem solving to try to make sure that we get an idea of how we can follow up with them in the future. And then lastly, instill hope, but never overpromise. The experience of homelessness and the things that precede that experience usually involve a lot of broken trusts, a lot of broken promises, a lot of loss. And at VA, our outreach workers, when we go out into the community, a lot of times what we're doing is restoring trust And that is a very fragile and delicate thing. And so we want to give veterans hope that the future will be brighter, but we don't want to overpromise, because broken promises will discourage them from working with us. You know, they've probably already been hurt by us before. Many of the folks on this call may have been hurt by the government. And so we're working on that fragile, delicate process of restoring trust. So we want to instill hope, but never overpromise. You're probably going to get these slides, but if you want, you can take a picture of this QR code. It's going to take you to hyperlinks to a lot of different really helpful resources. If you don't have a chance right now, don't worry. Towards the end of the presentation, we're going to bring this QR code back up again during the Q&A so that you can take a picture of it. But I just want to warn you, the QR code is there. If you have a passion and a desire to volunteer or otherwise get involved, but you don't know how to get connected with your local VA, send us an email, homelessvets@va.gov. It comes to myself and a couple others. We'll get you connected to your local VA. You can also reach us online at www.va.gov/homeless. A lot of really, really great information there. I've said a lot of stuff today, but if there's one thing that I want you to take away, it's this number, the National Call Center for Homeless Veterans, 877-424-3838. This call is free, confidential, where trained counselors are ready to talk to any veteran or an advocate on behalf of a veteran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to connect them to their local VA for help. Save this in your phone. Keep this handy. If you encounter a veteran who's experiencing homelessness or housing instability, give them this number, the National Call Center for Homeless Veterans. There are other ways that you want to make an impact. You can partner and volunteer with VA. Our local Center for Development and Civic Engagement, which is formerly the Voluntary Service, are our great arm of VA at your local medical centers that can do a lot of different things. There are a lot of ideas that a lot of people have that are great, but if Congress doesn't give us the statutory authority to do it, we actually can't do it, regardless how great the idea is. So that's why we oftentimes partner with folks like you in the community to help fill those gaps of the things that our veterans still need, but we don't have the authority to provide. I have a link to the Center for Development and Civic Engagement office here for you to check out. You can volunteer at our stand downs. These are wonderful resource fairs. If you're familiar with the concept of a job fair, this is like a resource fair of different services that people experiencing homelessness can go to. They get food, clothing donations, health screens, and more. Stand downs happen all across the country, all throughout the year. There may be one happening in your community in the coming days or weeks. So we encourage you to check out and monitor the upcoming stand down events page, see if there's one near you, and if you're feeling up to it, volunteer. If you are a landlord or if you know of landlords, rent to our veterans. All of the amazing progress that I talked about is unbelievably dependent on the rental market in your community. We depend primarily and solely and hilariously on affordable housing in your communities to house the veterans that are in your communities. So we're always looking for landlords to partner with us. If you are a landlord or you know of a landlord, share and visit our landlords page to learn more. It also has a form where you can give us information on your available units right now so that we can get them connected to our homeless program teams so that they can get them connected to the veterans. Maybe you're not a landlord, but you actually still want to help actually house homeless veterans. There are opportunities for you to partner with us. I encourage you to check out our helpful article. It's called literally, So You Want to House Homeless Veterans? It goes over our 4 major programs, our grant programs, our contract programs, etc., and the opening moves for each of what you would have to do in order to get started. We encourage you to check that out. If you're a business owner, you know a business owner, we encourage you to hire our veterans. A lot of our veterans, the vast majority of our veterans are looking for work. They're open for work. And so we actually have staff. We call them community employment coordinators. They're all throughout the country, and they help develop employment resources for veterans. If you're a job, you're looking for veterans who are seeking employment, you have jobs, check out our community employment coordinator, reach out to them, and let them know about the work that is available. Lastly, before we get to the Q&A, just 2 more slides, ways to stay connected and engaged. If you're interested about staying plugged in, sign up for our newsletter. It's once a month, and it just provides helpful updates, message from our executive director, information about grant notices and grant awards, good news stories from veterans who've been helped. If you go to our website, va.gov/homeless, this gentleman's wonderful photo will show up. You type in your email, and you're good to go. Lastly, as Ms. Pauling mentioned, we have a podcast. It's literally called Ending Veteran Homelessness. All of this stuff is very technical that I've gone over. So at Ending Veteran Homelessness, we strive to make all of this accessible and understandable for you. It's available on all the platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, your podcatcher of choice. The most recent episode actually aired yesterday, where we talk about the point in time count and we go into detail. So we encourage you to check it out. Before I let you go, if you want to know more about the basics of homeless programs, I encourage you also to check out our Intro to Veteran Homelessness podcast series. It's a 3-part series. Part 1 you could probably skip because it's basically a version of this presentation. Part 2 gives an overview of the different demographics of the veterans that we serve and the trends. And then lastly, part 3 is an overview of all the different programs and services. So if you wanted to dive in more about what the programs and services are, I encourage you to jump right into part 3. You can check them out in these links. Okay, that is all from me. I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Pauling and Reverend Washington. I want to thank you so much for your time. I hope you found this last hour to be valuable, and that you feel empowered in our collective work to ensure that every veteran has a safe and stable place to call home. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Shawn, for that very informative presentation. We appreciate your time today. Now we will address questions in the Q&A box on the screen. I will read the questions out loud, and Mr. Liu will provide a response. If we're unable to get around to your questions today, we will take down your question and get a response back to you. We have your email address as point of contact information. If you need to reach out to the presenter, Mr. Shawn Liu, we will have his point of contact on the screen, as you can see here, and we'll also have our point of contact for our team members here in the office as well. We have a few questions, Shawn. The first question comes from Bill Ashton. How many of the homeless veterans are enrolled in the VA healthcare? I believe if the majority cause of homeless is mental health, if we could get them registered right when they leave the service so they could get help or know where to get help. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I don't have that number offhand. And actually, for some reason, my keyboard is not typing. So we did start a recent initiative called Connecting Veterans to Care to increase veterans' enrollment and access to primary care, because what we know is that primary care is often that doorway to all of the other programs and services in the Veterans Health Administration. So we could probably get you that as a follow-up. One of the things I just want to kind of make note, though, is that although mental health is a risk factor, I would actually argue that it's not necessarily the primary risk factor of homelessness. In many ways, what we're seeing a lot is veterans who live in communities with high housing costs, that is a really important precondition that often more strongly dictates future homelessness than simple mental health diagnosis. So even though it is absolutely important, I completely agree that we need to get every veteran who's eligible for VA healthcare benefits enrolled in VA. I just want to push back slightly. I would disagree that mental health is the major cause of homelessness. And what we've seen a lot is that rising housing costs in particular is a really big driver.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Second question is coming from Gary Medina. When assisting veterans on finding long-term housing, has it been recorded? What is the common trend amongst them, such as early child trauma as a factor or compounded trauma after their military service?
Yeah, and in many ways, what we talked about earlier in the presentation were the big common trends. That slide that I showed you earlier, that's actually from a research from 2015. We have the citation at the bottom, so if you want to read the article, I encourage you to do so. So yeah, again, like a lot of risk factors that are really common are going to be mental health conditions, especially when we talk about military service, we're talking about combat-related PTSD. Substance use disorders, adverse childhood events, which does include early childhood trauma as well. Those are definitely well-reported risk factors. And how we know that is because those are actually done from retrospective analyses of veterans that are actually in our programs that are being served. And then we go back and look through their medical records and their history, and then we discover this offhand. Or we discover this through research.
Thank you, Ms. Liu. Next question comes from Crystal Bennett. Are there specific resources for rural veterans in this situation? We have a lot of veterans who live in campers on other people's property. Part of the issue is lack of availability in the rural areas, and the veteran doesn't want to go to a town/city where resources are available. Any suggestions?
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't have specific programs for rural veterans. All of the programs and services that we have do work in rural, urban, and suburban settings. But your point is well taken, which is a couple different things. Oftentimes, rural communities, the resources are more sparse or distributed, which can make accessing them a little bit more tricky. The second point, which is well taken, which is a lot of times the major offices are in major cities. So oftentimes we need to have our outreach workers go out into rural areas, or what's gaining in practice in this kind of like post-pandemic world that we live in, which is virtual care. VA is making really great use of something called clinical resource hubs, which provide kind of like virtual telehealth sort of services that extend our reach into the rural areas. Veteran who lives in campers is a little bit tricky in terms of eligibility, because it's going to vary wildly about the quality of the camper. Like, is it a really, really well put together camper that has utility connections, or is it a pickup truck with kind of a little bit of attachment on the truck bed with, and they have to go inside or go outside to go to the bathroom? Those differences will make an impact whether a rural veteran will be eligible for programs and services. Regardless, that call center number is still valid. So if a veteran is rural, suburban, urban, we encourage them to call the call center.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Next question comes from Mr. Ben. For a landlord, what's the average time to be able to get a vet onto a property from inspection to getting a vet selected?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm just going to check one of my dashboards really quickly. So we have a lot of different programs and services. I'm going to give you one example from our HUD-VASH program, and this is going to vary across the country. But what I can say is that in 2024, for HUD-VASH, the average days from enrollment in our HUD-VASH program to lease up is around 108 days. In that time, the process of identifying a landlord and then getting them all of the housing authorities paperwork done and then moving in is a subset of that, and is significantly shorter, but that will range depending on your housing authority. Most of that 108 days is actually us looking for landlords like you in your communities. So don't think that as a landlord, wow, it's going to take 110 days. That's not the case. Most of that 108, 110 days is us finding you or other landlords like you who will rent to our veterans. Once we actually get to you, although it ranges varying in different communities, it's significantly shorter than that 108 days.
Thank you so much, Shawn. The next question comes from Dentist Waters, and Mr. Washington will provide a response for this question. How are you working with the faith communities?
Yeah, so I want to provide a response, but I think Shawn may want to chime in. So Shawn and I work together across the nation as we have in-person events. We make sure that we have an element of veteran homelessness there locally. So Shawn, you want to chime in as well? I know you guys have some initiatives in the faith community as well.
Yeah, actually, so we partner a lot with faith-based organizations. Many of the programs that I listed on the programs and services slide are grant programs that we award to different providers in the community. Many of them who are faith-based. I'm not going to list them out because I don't want to. We're not really allowed to endorse, and we're actually looking at doing some additional kind of like information gathering to get a sense of the percentage of the grantees that are faith-based providers. But we actually have a lot of our grantees who are faith-based providers who provide not only transitional housing, but permanent housing.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Next question is coming from Dr. Lloyd. Shawn, do the house need to have central air and heat?
It doesn't need to have central air and heat. It is going to be dependent on the community and what what the housing authorities use is something that HUD calls the NSPIRE standards. Forgive me, my keyboard is not working for some reason, so I can't really type it out. But it's NSPIRE. That is the housing standards that you're going to want to look at, and it'll go through and tell you all of the different things that units need to have in order to meet the quality standards inspections.
Thank you so much. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. Next question comes from Vernon Long. How often do veterans go from homeless to home ownership and become landlords?
That's a really good question. It's not very common. It does happen. I want to say it's less than 4%. I don't have the number offhand, but I want to say it's around less than 4%, maybe even around 1%. I don't know how many go on to become landlords still. So we're largely talking about moving from homelessness to housing, which is oftentimes rental units, and then on again to home ownership. We don't really have any data on anybody who becomes a future landlord, but it's not very common, but it does happen.
We don't have time for any more questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Liu, for your presentation today. If you need to reach out to the presenter, please see his point of contact information on the screen. You can also reach out to our team for information. At this time, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Mr. Washington for closing remarks.
Thanks, True. Hey, Shawn, thank you. I can tell you, because of the questions, it's obvious that you have a very good sense of what's going on in the community of veteran homelessness. We have additional questions. My team will get that to you for you to answer those folks directly, as we always do. Again, thank you, brother. We appreciate you. And thank all of you for joining us today. As a reminder, please share with your friends, colleagues, veterans, family, clergy, everyone to sign up for these webinars. We have 3 to 4 each month. And please sign up to join our team so that you too can be dialed into information in the VA directly. Thank you all and be blessed.
Thank you so much, Mr. Liu, for this wealth of information today. Again, if we were unable to get around to your questions today, we do have your question and your name and email address, and we'll get a response back to you shortly. If you registered for this webinar, we will provide you with today's presentation. A recording will be provided on our website at a later date. Please subscribe to our website and Facebook for future webinars and information. This adjourns today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today, and goodbye.